Wednesday. It's the start of a new week. Ace is here behind me, and he'll probably get up and grumble at some point. I'm wearing the same sweater as yesterday. I don't care. It is a winter wonderland outside, and as such, my voice has been affected. Just my schnoz, just up in here. I don't think I'm sick, but it sure sounds like I'm sick. I just reached 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, so thank you so much. And I see now that I'm at 180 followers on Twitch. That's awesome. Thank you for someone who's just reading, someone who has just spent just about a year simply reading aloud, and not even well all the time, I might add. So yeah, that's fucking awesome. So thanks. We are continuing with H.P. Lovecraft's Necronomicon, specifically the case of Charles Dexter Ward. My nose is going to be doing whatever it's doing, so I will probably be sniffling a fair amount. And it looks as if there are some symbols and whatnot in this. So, oh goodness gracious. If it's not Latin, it's something else, eh? Okay. So let's mark where we're hopefully going to get to. And without further ado, I believe we are in chapter 3. Chapter 3, which is called... God. It's actually chapter 4, A Mutation and a Madness. So it's chapter 4, part 4. Oh, okay, cool. And yet, after all, it was from no step of Mr. Ward's or Dr. Willett's that the next move in this singular case proceeded. The father and the physician, rebuffed and confused by a shadow too shapeless and intangible to combat, had rested uneasily on their oars, while the typed notes of young Ward to his parents grew fewer and fewer. Then came the first of the month with its customary financial adjustments, and the clerks at certain banks began a peculiar shaking of heads and telephoning from one to the other. Officials who knew Charles Ward by sight went down to the bungalow to ask why every check of his appearing at this juncture was a clumsy forgery, and were reassured less than they ought to have been when the youth hoarsely explained that his hand had lately been so much affected by a nervous shock as to make a normal writing impossible. He could, he said, form no written characters at all, except with great difficulty, and could prove it by the fact that he had been forced to type all his recent letters, even those to his father and mother, who would bear out the assertion. What made the investigators pause in confusion was not this circumstance alone, for that was nothing unprecedented or fundamentally suspicious, nor even the Pawtuxet gossip, of which one or two of them had caught echoes. It was the muddled discourse of the young man which nonplussed them, implying, as it did, a virtually total loss of memory concerning important monetary matters which he had had at his fingertips only a month or two before. Something was wrong, for despite the apparent coherence and rationality of his speech, there could be no normal reason for this ill-concealed blankness on vital points. Moreover, although none of these men knew Ward well, they could not help observing the change in his language and matter. They had heard he was an antiquarian, and even the most hopeless antiquarians do not make use of obsolete phraseology and gestures. Altogether, this combination of hoarseness, palsied hands, bad memory, altered speech and bearing, represented some disturbance or malady of genuine gravity, which, no doubt, formed the basis of the prevailing odd rumors. And after their departure, the party of officials decided that a talk with the senior Ward was imperative. So on the 6th of March, 1928, there was a long and serious conference in Mr. Ward's office, after which the utterly bewildered father summoned Dr. Willett in a kind of helpless resignation. Willett looked over the strange and awkward signatures of the checks and compared them in his mind with the penmanship of that last frantic note. Certainly, the change was radical and profound, and yet there was something damnably familiar about the new writing. It had crabbed and archaic tendencies of a stroke utterly different from that which the youth had always used. It was strange, but where had he seen it before? On the whole, it was obvious that Charles was insane. Of that, there could be no doubt. And since it appeared unlikely that he could handle his property or continue to deal with the outside world much longer, Something must quickly be done toward his oversight and possible cure. It was then that the alienists were called in. Doctors Peck and Waite of Providence and Dr. Lyman of Boston, to whom Mr. Ward and Dr. Willett gave the most exhaustive possible history of the case, and who conferred at length in the now unused library of their young patient, examining what books and papers of his were left in order to gain some further notion of his habitual mental cast. After scanning this material and examining the youth's note to Willett, they all agreed that Charles Ward's studies had been enough to unseat or at least to warp any ordinary intellect, and wished most heartily that they could see his more intimate volumes and documents. But this latter, they knew, they could do, if at all, only after a scene at the bungalow itself. Willett now reviewed the whole case with a febrile energy, it being at this time that he obtained the statements of the workmen who had seen Charles find the Curwen documents, and that he collated the incidents of the destroyed newspaper items, looking up the latter at the journal office. On Thursday, the 8th of March, Doctors Willett, Peck, Lyman, and Waite, accompanied by Mr. Ward, paid the youth their momentous call, making no concealment of their object, and questioning the now acknowledged patient with extreme minuteness. Charles, though he was inordinately long in answering the summons, and was still redolent of strange and noxious laboratory odors when he did finally make his agitated appearance, proved a far from recalcitrant subject, and admitted freely that his memory and balance had suffered somewhat from close application to abstruse studies. He offered no resistance when his removal to other quarters was insisted upon, and seemed, indeed, to display a high degree of intelligence as apart from mere memory. His conduct would have sent his interviewers away in bafflement, had not the persistently archaic trend of his speech and unmistakable replacement of modern by ancient ideas in his consciousness marked him out as one definitely removed from the normal. Of his work, he would say no more to the group of doctors than he had formerly said to his family and to Dr. Willett, and his frantic note of the previous month he dismissed as mere nerves and hysteria. He insisted that this shadowy bungalow possessed no library or laboratory beyond the visible ones, and waxed abstruse in explaining the absence from the house of such odors as now saturated all his clothing. Neighborhood gossip he attributed to nothing more than the cheap inventiveness of baffled curiosity. Of the whereabouts of Dr. Allen, he said he did not feel at liberty to speak definitely, but assured his visitors that the bearded and spectacled man would return when needed. In paying off the stolid brava who resisted all questioning by the visitors, and in closing the bungalow, which still seemed to hold such nighted secrets, Ward showed no signs of nervousness, save a barely noticed tendency to pause, as though listening for something very faint. He was apparently animated by a calmly philosophic resignation, as if his removal were the merest transient incident which would cause the least trouble if facilitated and disposed of once and for all. It was clear that he trusted to his obviously unimpaired keenness of absolute mentality to overcome all the embarrassments into which his twisted memory, his lost voice and handwriting, and his secretive and eccentric behavior had led him. His mother, it was agreed, was not to be told of the change, his father supplying typed notes in his name. Ward was taken to the restfully and picturesquely situated private hospital maintained by Dr. Waite on Connecticut Island in the Bay, and subjected to the closest scrutiny and questioning by all the physicians connected with the case. It was then that the physical oddities were noticed, the slackened metabolism, the altered skin, and the disproportionate neural reactions. Dr. Willett was the most perturbed of the various examiners, for he had attended Ward all his life, and could appreciate with terrible keenness the extent of his physical disorganization. Even the familiar olive mark on his hip was gone, while on his chest was a great black mole, or cicatrice, which had never been there before, and which made Willett wonder whether the youth had ever submitted to any of the witch markings reputed to be inflicted at certain unwholesome nocturnal meetings in wild and lonely places. The doctor could not keep his mind off a certain transcribed witch trial record from Salem, which Charles had shown him in the old non-secretive days, and which read, Mr. G.B. on that night put he devil his mark upon Bridget S., Jonathan A., Simon O., Deliverance W., Joseph C., Susan P., Mehitabel C., and Deborah B. Ward's face, too, troubled him horribly, till at length he suddenly discovered why he was horrified. Above the young man's right eye was something which he had never previously noticed. A small scar or pit, precisely like that in the crumbled painting of old Joseph Curwen, and perhaps attesting some hideous ritualistic inoculation to which both had submitted at a certain stage of their occult careers. While Ward himself was puzzling all the doctors at the hospital, a very strict watch was kept on all mail addressed either to him or to Dr. Allen, which Mr. Ward had ordered delivered at the family home. Willett had predicted that very little would be found, since any communications of a vital nature would probably have been exchanged by messenger. But in the latter part of March, there did come a letter from Prague for Dr. Allen, which gave both the doctor and the father deep thought. It was in a very crabbed and archaic hand, and, though clearly not the effort of a foreigner, showed almost as singular a departure from modern English as the speech of young Ward himself. It read, Kleinstrasse 11, Altstadt, Prague, 11th February, 1928. Brother in Almusin Metriton. Once again, it's Old English. Here we go. I this day received your mention of what came up from the salts I sent you. It was wrong, and means clearly that he headstones had been changed when Barnabas got me the specimen. It is often so, as you must be sensible, of from the thing you got from ye King's Chapel ground in 1769, and what he got from old Burying Point in 1690, that was like to end him. I got such a thing in Egypt 75 years gone, from the which came the scar ye boy saw on me here in 1924. As I told you long ago, do not call up that which you cannot put down, either from dead salts or out of ye spheres beyond. Have ye words for laying at all times ready, and stop not to be sure when there is any doubt of whom you have. Stones are all changed now in 9 grounds out of 10. You are never sure till you question. I this day heard from H., who has had trouble with the soldiers. He is like to be sorry Transylvania is passed from Hungary to Romania, and would change his seat if the castle weren't so full of what we know. But of this he hath doubtless writ you. In my next sending there will be somewhat from a hill tomb from ye east that will delight you greatly. Meanwhile, forget not I am desirous of B.F. if you can possibly get him for me. You know G in Philadelphia better than I. Have him up first if you will, but do not use him so hard he will be difficult, for I must speak to him in ye end. Ow! What is your problem? Go! Go! Nasty boy! Yog Shothoth Nebloid Zin Simon O. This is another letter to Mr. J.C. in Providence. Yeah, surprise attack. Fucking jerk is what he is. Rude. God forbid a girl stretch. Mr. J.C. in Providence. Mr. Ward and Dr. Willett paused in utter chaos before this apparent bit of unrelieved insanity. Only by degrees did they absorb what it seemed to imply. So the absent Dr. Allen, and not Charles Ward, had come to be the leading spirit at Pawtuxet? That must explain the wild reference and determination in the youth's last frantic letter. And what of this addressing of the bearded and spectacled stranger as Mr. J.C.? There was no escaping the inference, but there are limits to possible monstrosity. Who was Simon O., the old man Ward had visited in Prague 4 years previously? Perhaps, but in the centuries behind there had been another Simon O. Simon Orne, alias Jedediah of Salem, who vanished in 1771, and whose peculiar handwriting Dr. Willett now unmistakably recognized from the photostatic copies of the Orne formulae which Charles had once shown him. What horrors and mysteries, what contradictions and contraventions of nature had come back after a century and a half to harass old Providence with her clustered spires and domes? The father and the old physician, virtually at a loss what to do or think, went to see Charles at the hospital and questioned him as delicately as they could about Dr. Allen, about the Prague visit, and about what he had learned of Simon or Jedediah Orne of Salem. To all these inquiries, the youth was politely non-committal, merely barking in his hoarse whisper that he had found Dr. Allen to have a remarkable spiritual rapport with certain souls from the past, and that any correspondent the bearded man might have had in Prague would probably be similarly gifted. When they left, Mr. Ward and Dr. Willett realized, to their chagrin, that they had really been the ones under catechism, and that without imparting anything vital himself, the confined youth had adroitly pumped them of everything the Prague letter had contained. Doctors Peck, Waite, and Lyman were not inclined to attach much importance to the strange correspondence of young Ward's companion, for they knew the tendency of kindred eccentrics and monomaniacs to band together, and believed that Charles or Allen had merely unearthed an extirpated counterpart, perhaps one who had seen Orne's handwriting and copied it in an attempt to pose as the bygone character's reincarnation. Allen himself was perhaps a similar case, and may have persuaded the youth into accepting him as an avatar of the long-dead Curwen. Such things had been known before, and on the same basis the hard-headed doctors disposed of Willett's growing disquiet about Charles Ward's present handwriting, as studied from unpremeditated specimens obtained by various ruses. Willett thought he had placed its odd familiarity at last, and that what it vaguely resembled was the bygone penmanship of old Joseph Curwen himself. But this the other physicians regarded as a phase of intimativeness, only to be expected in a mania of this sort, and refused to grant it any importance, either favorable or unfavorable. Recognizing this prosaic attitude in his colleagues, Willett advised Mr. Ward to keep himself the letter which arrived for Dr. Allen on the 2nd of April from raucous Transylvania, in a handwriting so intensely and fundamentally like that of the Hutchinson cipher that both father and physician paused in awe before breaking the seal. This reads as follows. Castle Ferenczi, 7 March 1928. Dear C. Had a squad of 20 militia up to talk about what the country folk say. Must dig deeper and have less heard. These Romanians plague one damnably, being officious and particular, where you could buy a Magyar off with a drinkle and food. Last month, M. got me the sarcophagus of the 5 sphinxes from the Acropolis, where he whom I called up said it would be, and I have had 3 talks with what was therein inhumed. I will go to Esso and Prague directly, and thence to you. It is stubborn, but ye know ye way with such. You show wisdom in having less about than before, for there was no need to keep the guards in shape and eating off their heads, and it made much to be found in case of trouble, as you too well know. You can now move and work elsewhere with no killing trouble if needful, though I hope no thing will soon force you to so bothersome a course. I rejoice that you traffic not so much with those outside, for there was ever a mortal peril in it, and you are sensible what it did when you asked protection of one not disposed to give it. You excel me in getting ye formulae, so another may say them with success, but Borellus fancied it would be so, if ye just right words were had. Does ye boy use him often? I regret that he grows squeamish, as I feared he would when I had him here nigh 15 months, but am sensible you know how to deal with him. You can't say him down with ye formulae, for that will work only upon such as ye other formulae hath called up from salts. But you still have strong hands on knife and pistol, and graves are not hard to dig, nor acids loath to burn. Says you have promised him BF. I must have him after. Be goes to you soon, and may he give you what you wish of the dark thing below Memphis. Employ care in what you call up, and beware of ye boy. It will be ripe in a year's time to have up ye legions from underneath, and then there are no bounds to what shall be ours. Have confidence in what I say, for you know and I have had these 150 years more than you to consult these matters in. Nefru, Kanai Hadoth, EDWH, for J. Curwen, Esquire, Providence. But if Willett and Mr. Ward refrained from showing this letter to the alienists, they did not refrain from acting upon it themselves. No amount of learned sophistry could controvert the fact that the strangely bearded and spectacled Dr. Allen, of whom Charles's frantic letter had spoken as such a monstrous menace, was in close and sinister correspondence with two inexplicable creatures with whom Ward had visited in his travels and who plainly claimed to be survivals or avatars of Curwen's old Salem colleagues, that he was regarding himself as the reincarnation of Joseph Curwen, and that he entertained, or at least advised to entertain, murderous designs against a boy who could scarcely be other than Charles Ward. There was organized horror afoot, and no matter who had started it, the missing Alan was, by this time, at the bottom of it. Therefore, thanking heaven that Charles was now safe in the hospital, Mr. Ward lost no time in engaging detectives to learn all they could of the cryptic bearded doctor, finding whence he had come and what Pawtuxet knew of him, and if possible, discovering his current whereabouts. Supplying the men with one of the bungalow keys which Charles yielded up, he urged them to explore Alan's vacant room, which had been identified when the patient's belongings had been packed, obtaining what clues they could from any effects he may have left about. Mr. Ward talked with the detectives in his son's old library, and they felt a marked relief when they left it at last, for there seemed to hover about the place a vague aura of evil. Perhaps it was what they had heard of the infamous old wizard whose picture had once stared from the panelled overmantel, and perhaps it was something different and irrelevant. But in any case, they all half-sensed an intangible miasma, which centered in that carven vestige of an older dwelling, and which, at times, almost rose to the intensity of a material emanation. Yeah, so there. Okay, one more page, and then we'll be done. So this is chapter 5. Nightmare and a Cataclysm. Part 1. And now swiftly followed that hideous experience which has left its indelible mark of fear on the soul of Marinus Bicknell Willett, and has added a decade to the visible age of one whose youth was even then far behind. Dr. Willett has conferred at length with Mr. Ward, and had come to an agreement with him on several points which both felt the alienists would ridicule. There was, they conceded, a terrible movement alive in the world, whose direct connection with a necromancy even older than the Salem witchcraft could not be doubted. That at least 2 living men, and one other of whom they dared not think, were in absolute possession of minds or personalities which had functioned as early as 1690 or before, was likewise almost unassailably proved even in the face of all known natural laws. What these horrible creatures, and Charles Ward as well, were doing, or trying to do, seemed fairly clear from their letters, and from every bit of light, both old and new, which had filtered in upon the case. They were robbing the tombs of all the ages, including those of the world's wisest and greatest men, in the hope of recovering from bygone ashes some vestige of the consciousness and lore which had once animated and informed them. A hideous traffic was going on amongst those nightmare ghouls, whereby illustrious bones were bartered with the calm calculativeness of schoolboys swapping books, and from what was extorted in this century dust, there was anticipated a power and a wisdom beyond anything which the cosmos had ever seen concentrated in one man or group. They had found unholy ways to keep their brains alive, either in the same body or different bodies, and had evidently achieved a way of tapping the consciousness of the dead whom they gathered together. There had, it seems, been some truth in chimerical old Borellus when he swore of preparing from even the most antique remains certain essential salts from which the shade of a long-dead living thing might be raised up. There was a formula for evoking such a shade, and another for putting it down, and it had now been so perfected that it could be taught successfully. One must be careful about evocations, for the markers of old graves are not always accurate. Willett and Mr. Ward shivered as they passed from conclusion to conclusion. Things, presences or voices of some sort, could be drawn down from unknown places as well as from the grave, and in this process, also one must be careful. Joseph Curwen had indubitably evoked many forbidden things, and as for Charles, what might one think of him? What forces outside the spheres had reached him from Joseph Curwen's day and turned his mind on forgotten things? He had been led to find certain directions, and he had used them. He had talked with the man of horror in Prague and stayed long with the creature in the mountains of Transylvania. And he must have found the grave of Joseph Curwen at last. That newspaper item and what his mother had heard in the night were too significant to overlook. Then he had summoned something, and it must have come. that mighty voice aloft on Good Friday, and those different tones in the locked attic laboratory. What were they like with their depth and hollowness? Was there not here some awful foreshadowing of the dreaded stranger Dr. Allen with his spectral base? Yes, that was what Mr. Ward had felt with vague horror in his single talk with the man, if men it were, over the telephone. What hellish consciousness or voice, what morbid shade or presence had come to answer Charles Ward's secret rites behind that locked door? Those voices heard an argument. Must have it read for 3 months. Good God. Was not that just before the vampirism broke out? The rifling of Ezra Whedon's ancient grave and the cries later at Pawtuxet, whose mind had planned the vengeance and rediscovered the shunned sea of elder blasphemies. And then the bungalow and the bearded stranger, and the gossip and the fear. The final madness of Charles, neither father nor doctor could attempt to explain, but they did feel sure that the mind of Joseph Curwen had come to earth again and was following its ancient morbidities. Was demonic possession in truth a possibility? Allen had something to do with it, and the detectives must find out more about one whose existence menaced the young man's life. In the meantime, since the existence of some vast crypt beneath the bungalow seemed virtually beyond dispute, some effort must be made to find it. Willett and Mr. Ward, conscious of the skeptical attitude of the alienists, resolved, during their final conference, to undertake a joint exploration of unparalleled thoroughness, and agreed to meet at the bungalow on the following morning with valises and with certain tools and accessories suited to architectural search and underground exploration. The morning of April 6th dawned clear, and both explorers were at the bungalow by 10 o'clock. Mr. Ward had the key, and an entry and cursory survey were made. From the disordered condition of Dr. Alien's room? Not Dr. Allen? That might just be a typo. From the disordered condition of Dr. Allen's room, it was obvious that the detectives had been there before, and the later searches hoped that they had found some clue which might prove of value. Of course, the main business lay in the cellar, so thither they descended without much delay, again making the circuit which each had vainly made before in the presence of the mad young owner. For a time, everything seemed baffling, each inch of the earthen floor and stone walls having so solid and innocuous an aspect that the thought of a yawning aperture was scarcely to be entertained. Willett reflected that since the original cellar was dug without knowledge of any catacombs beneath, the beginning of the passage would represent the strictly modern delving of young Ward and his associates, where they had probed for the ancient vaults whose rumor could have reached them by no wholesome means. The doctor tried to put himself in Charles's place to see how a delver would be likely to start, but could not gain much inspiration from this method. Then he decided on elimination as a policy and went carefully over the whole subterranean surface, both vertical and horizontal, trying to account for every inch separately. He was soon substantially narrowed down, and at last had nothing left but the small platform before the washtubs, which he had tried once before in vain. Now experimenting in every way possible, and exerting a double strength, he finally found that the top did indeed turn and slide horizontally on a corner pivot. Beneath it lay a trim concrete surface with an iron manhole, to which Mr. Ward at once rushed with excited zeal. The cover was not hard to lift, and the father had quite removed it when Willett noticed the queerness of his aspect. He was swaying and nodding dizzily, and in the gust of noxious air which swept up from the black pit beneath, the doctor soon recognized ample cause. In a moment, Dr. Willett had his fainting companion on the floor above and was reviving him with cold water. Mr. Ward responded feebly, but it could be seen that the mephitic blast from the crypt had in some way gravely sickened him. Wishing to take no chances, Willett hastened out to Broad Street for a taxicab, and had soon dispatched the sufferer home, despite his weak-voiced protests, after which he produced an electric torch, covered his nostrils with a band of sterile gauze, and descended once more to peer into the new-found depths. The foul air had now slightly abated, and Willett was able to send a beam of light down the Stygian hole. For about 10 feet, he saw. It was a sheer cylindrical drop with concrete walls and an iron ladder, after which the hole appeared to strike a flight of old stone steps, which must originally have emerged to earth somewhat southward of the present building. Okay, that's where we're going to stop today. Thank you so much for reading with me, despite my sickness. And I will upload this on YouTube, and I hope you have a great day.